Hi, good morning everyone. So I hope that networking party was fun. And first question, and let's see how well you partied yesterday is, do you know this band? Yeah, at least a few know it. A few don't know. It's Run DMC and they have a song called It's Tricky. And when I think about chatbots and QA and what kind of experience I had, that is the song that sounds in my head. So I would like today to give you a brief introduction, what are chatbots, what kind of types there are, and share my experience I had testing a chatbot. So first of all, what is the perception we have of chatbots nowadays? Some people may think it's some kind of higher level artificial intelligence about to take over the world in the form of robots, or at least that's what my mom thinks. Because when I started working with chatbots and I told her, I'm working with chatbots, she would question me each time I would text her. She would ask me, are you a chatbot? And I'm like, no mom, chatbots don't speak Lithuanian yet, the ones that I'm working on. And it took a while to calm her down because she would just think that I'm a chatbot. But what are they actually? So if we Google chatbots are, we get very contradicting opinions. They are useful and useless. They are the future and not the future. So what are they? If you look at the definition, a chatbot is a program or artificial intelligence which conducts a conversation via textual or auditory methods. So the main goal here is to conduct a conversation. That's not an easy goal to reach. But why do we need chatbots? So when I even went to a hipster cafe in Dublin to get my flat white and read a magazine there, even the interview was written in the form of text. As you can see, with some kind of celebrity, we are so used to texting that we prefer texting over calling. We would rather text a service and get fast answer and fast feedback. And even if we look at Facebook and click Discover, we can find quite a lot of automated messaging solutions, like you can ask questions about celebrities you like, or you can find a job with a job bot, or shop. Some of the interesting, very useful chatbots recently were Do Not Pay, which was a chatbot helping you to fill in the form to appeal the fine you got for parking. And it actually helped a lot of people because it's way easier to just text a chatbot and fill in the form rather than search in the government websites and trying to figure out where it is and what should I do next. Another chatbot that I really like is called WooBot. And with WooBot, you can actually chat on Facebook, and it is a mental health chatbot. So it checks in on you, it asks you how you are doing, and it can even spot some patterns in your behavior and mental health. So what kind of types there are? So if you look at some of the types of chatbots, some are menu button based, others are keyword recognition based, and the trickiest ones are contextual using machine learning. So one of the first chatbots was Elisa. And Elisa was a mock psychotherapist. And as you can see, I asked Elisa, how should I introduce her to this audience? And Elisa asked, do you would like to introduce anyone else? You already see that there's certain keyword recognition happening here, because Elisa takes the keywords, do, would, and my sentence was rather complicated. And then when I say no, only you, Elisa answers, you are being a bit negative. So as you can see, Elisa is straightforwardly keyword-based chatbot and not always the best one. The very useful chatbots nowadays are service chatbots, like Pizza Hut chatbot. So you can actually have a certain flow of actions that you can take, and you cannot really talk to it about whether or how it is. However, you can really reach the goal you want. So you can order a pizza, it understands actually what kind of options there are, and you can choose something. And you can also tell what number of pizzas you want. So here is an example that it also understands that. But what are the trickiest ones, and what is my experience? So I would like to introduce you Baloo. Baloo is an internal location handling chatbot which we built using machine learning. And we did that because we wanted to gain some experience in machine learning and understand it better. So when I first joined the project, I was so excited. I was like, wow, it's a chatbot. I never worked on that. And it ended up being quite challenging. So today I'd like to share some of the challenges. And first of all, of course, we have to understand how it works. So there may be some definitions that maybe are not that clear, but hopefully something remains and you understand a bit about machine learning. So when we look at the flow, the high-level view would be that user goes to a chat platform. Our choice was Google Chat, and there it can connect with Baloo. And Baloo itself is built using conversational AI framework, Rasa, and it stores certain information in Redis, as well as it connects with internal API, which handles all this vacation handling. So if you want to book a vacation, Baloo itself doesn't do it, but it calls an API and does it there, and then comes back and gives you the response. And also we connect this chatbot with Chatbase, which is collecting all the strategic texts. So if we are talking to the chatbot, we can actually analyze the results in Chatbase. But let's look inside Baloo. So one of the biggest challenges in chatbots is data. Everything comes from data. We are not yet in the stage of AI that would self-learn out of nowhere. We need data to feed it. So in Rasa, there are certain files that help you do that, and there are two main parts. One part is defining intents, for example. Intents are a concept that when you say a sentence, what kind of intended meaning do you have there? So if I say good afternoon, my intended meaning likely is greet. So we would define greet and all the ways you can say greet. Let's say hi, hello, hey, good evening, and so on. Intent as well could be not only the greeting, it could be as well some kind of action when it comes to vacation handling in this case. So if I say, I want to book a vacation, that's my intent, right? I want a vacation. Another text-speech thing is entities. So entities, I really like because you can visualize them, and there is a tool. So I put the first paragraph of my abstract here, and I can just click a button, and as you can see, some entities are actually taken out. So there are a lot of tools in Baloo. We use Duckling, and Duckling would extract entities that are in the text. What does it mean? Well, entity could be a date, it could be a name, it could be a person in this case. All the dates were taken out, percentage as well, and the company was mistakenly thought that it's a person. But it's not a person, but it's pretty good anyway. And the cool part here is that even text is understood as entity. So you can say a few years, and we understand that it's some kind of date measurement. So we have intents, what we intend to say in the text, and we have entities, these structural things that we use in deciding about text. We also need slots. Slots are a concept that if chatbot wants to store some information about user. For example, you want to store when vacation should start and when should it end, and we want to keep it there, and then maybe free it up later on. And another thing that's very important is templates. So templates are basically defining the speech of the chatbot. So what would the chatbot say back? We call it utters. So chatbot utters back something. And you could define there all kinds of ways how the chatbot could speak. And lastly, there are some actions. So chatbot wants to do something. So likely, very often it's utter back something. But also it could be, let's say, getting the number of vacation days left from internal API. So we need to define that as well. So there are these files which define a lot of configuration and data for the chatbot, but the tricky part actually is stories. So what do we mean with stories? Basically, stories are scenarios or workflow that users could do. And these are very useful in a sense because chatbot can learn from these and predict actions even for the scenarios it doesn't know about. So that's the cool part about machine learning. So even if you do not cover a particular scenario, like here, we say that if a user has an intent greet, we want to utter back greet. If user says they want to take a vacation and they give a date, we fill in the slots with vacation and we ask if they confirmed it with their team, and so on. And this is actually very useful to define a lot of stories, but this is well problematic because your data has to be reliable. And the predicted actions sometimes are good, sometimes are not that good, but it can cover all edge cases. So if next time I don't say greet, Baloo may still recognize the conversation and context and predict accordingly. So the example would be as follows. If a user comes to the platform and says how many vacation days I have left for this year, Baloo immediately gives you an answer that you have 12 vacation days left. But what does it even mean? What happens behind the curtains? So first of all, we go to the green part and we go to the chat platform. So that's where we ask Baloo the information. From this text, we are going to intent classification. So we are trying to understand, what did this user mean? What happened? So here we understand that user wants annual leave left. And then we extract certain information in the form of entities. And in this case, we understand that this year means that it's from the 1st of January until the 31st of December. And then we actually try to go to dialogue model and use the stories we define. So we are trying to predict action based on the information we have and the context. And here we are predicting that we have to get how many days we actually have left connecting to external API. So that's what we do then. We resolve the action. And for this, we need to connect to that API, get the information, we get the result, and only then we generate the natural language for the chatbot based on the templates we have, based on the definitions we have, and give it back to the chat platform. So, how do you test it? This is something that took me a while, and it was a little bit unconventional at some points. So we wanted fast feedback. Of course, we are deploying, and we want to know as soon as possible if it's good or not. And and we have quite a lot of diagrams actually which define the functionality. But this would be more for the rule-based chatbot. And Baloo was actually a machine learning chatbot, meaning that you could ask how are you and Baloo would answer, it would know. However, these diagrams were useful for certain flows that we could define in stories, but they would not cover a lot. So this is already to look at, it's overwhelming. However, it's way more overwhelming than that because our communication can involve, what did you say? Tell me a joke and things like that. So we tried to have certain kind of feedback, and we started with unit tests. So of course, development was being done with TDD. And then we decided to have something like integration tests. And what did it mean was that we are connecting with this internal API. If we are connecting with this API, we would like to actually check what happens if we mock this API and what kind of results we get for Baloo. So we would write certain integration tests which basically would define in the JSON format the conversation, and we will call it a dialogue fixture. So here you can see that a user says, I'd like to cancel some vacation. It's already in the textual form, and it is set by a user. So, and then we have certain actions that we expect from a chatbot. And this we would run as a test, and if results are not as we defined in this JSON, we would fail the test. The issue with this was that these tests were quite flaky, and they would take quite a long time. So, and then what goes next? Because, all right, we were connecting with external API, we can do contract tests, we can have a little end-to-end test, but all this conversational ability, it's so hard to measure quality of conversation, right? So here we had to actually think a little bit differently than conventional methods. So we had to look at machine learning metrics. This is a confusion matrix, which defines how intents are being classified. So we take our trained model of the chatbot, And then we take a set of test data that we know what it is. So we know that hello should be greet. And then we feed it to the trained model, and then we see if it matches. So if the model is really good, diagonal is very strong blue. As you can see, there are some outliers, meaning that sometimes when I say hello, it thinks that it's goodbye. But this is just taking one text without all the context of conversation and trying to understand what kind of intent it is. But it can be very helpful. The deeper view metric here is intent classification model from TensorFlow. So here there are some more machine learning metrics that can be useful for debugging. But these were generated manually, and we would need to check them after each deployment and compare them. And it explained only the part of intents and intent classification. But what about all the conversation, all the conversational flow? So there was quite a few tricky situations there. Sometimes I would talk to Baloo for a while, and then I see something trivial like I want a vocation. That is the very first thing that it learned to recognize, and it would tell me, am I kidding? Yes. This is the answer actually to, are you a chatbot? So Baloo thought that I asked, are you a chatbot? While I actually asked that I want a vocation. So sometimes Baloo would get very confused if there was conversation before. So even if it would understand the intent itself, but in this context, it got very confused. Other times, I would give a date in a slightly different form than its training data would be, like August 19th, and it would tell me that you have 2 days left, vocation. That's not what I asked, and I just gave a starting date. They didn't even ask me for the end date. And it would happen like this. And actually, when we would look at the intents themselves, like this is the example of looking at the 1st of July, it's the bottom line, and then we actually have probabilities to everything that Baloo thinks it could be. So it understands that the first probability is informed date. And that's correct, right? It's 94% that it's informed date. But sometimes text would have good probability for the intent, but bad probability for the action itself, that within the conversation, it wouldn't think that it's this intent anymore. It would think, okay, based on these actions, I think I should say maybe goodbye or something like that. So the challenges we had here, the very main one was that we didn't really have any kind of dialogue flow metrics. We didn't know what actually changed there. And we couldn't get very fast feedback, so we were afraid to change the data because we never knew if we made it better or worse. And then also the integration tests were flaky. They would not only take a long time, but they would also sometimes fail, sometimes pass, because it's all probabilities, right? So sometimes it would go to the one side and another time to another one. And we actually had to tune our data and make sure it's very strong a lot to tackle this challenge. And lastly, there were no automation solutions, so we couldn't get very fast automated feedback however we wanted because it's conversation. So there are some solutions like Botium, and they also suggest that they are using something like dialogue fixtures, as we did for the integration test, but it takes a lot of time, right? And also there are some ideas that another chatbot should test your chatbot, which would make sense. However, how do you make sure that the data of another chatbot is good as well? That is my main question mark. I really that's the main struggle we have, the data. And we cannot make the other one test it if its data as well is corrupt. Well, not corrupt, but not as reliable. So what I did a lot was exploratory testing, and this one was in a sense in a very different form than usually, because I had to think of the inputs that chatbot may not understand properly. So if I say yup instead of yes, Baloo didn't understand it. And it was a really strange thing because I had to think how humans communicate. How do we say certain things? And then also there were some nice cases where I could just play around with inputs and take more vocation than possible and end up with negative number of leave days left, which was pretty nice, so I could find quite a lot of issues like that. However, sometimes this would happen. And I'd have no idea what's happening. And nobody knew. And I would write to a developer and I'd say, what's happening? And they're like, I don't know, it's a bug, I guess. And then we would all look back and all the metrics looked nice and test passed, but still this happens.
Sounds like that you
What?
bad mood.
Yeah. It's not in the mood for talking, I guess. So this would happen, and sometimes I would just sit at my desk and think, oh God, how do I test this chatbot? Am I supposed to manually just fill in all these inputs and think of the ways humans communicate? And then one of the developers told me, you don't test the chatbot tests you. And I started thinking that, well, maybe he was right actually, because that chatbot made me think about human communication way more than I imagined, and it was very challenging. However, despite of that, we had to do something, right? So we had to somehow summarize what we learned and try to structure our work, not to get overwhelmed. So for this, we decided to create something like quality principles. So certain priorities on what we are looking at first. And the very first one was, of course, functionality. So if I have to say the until when date 3 times, and Baloo doesn't understand it, that's not all right, for sure. And for this, what would we do a lot? So we have dialogue fixtures, but they don't cover all the cases. So what we would do was a lot of user testing and exploratory testing. So first of all, as a person, for me, English is second language. And I have a certain way of communication, right? All of us do. We can use certain format of dates, and I can ask, let's say, and I can play around in exploratory testing and think of the ways how I could express something. Like in this case, I said end of September and end of November, and Baloo understood it as 1st of September and 1st of November. So entity wasn't extracted nicely, but also it's all about like the way we communicate. And me alone, or developers, or anyone in our team couldn't express all the company, right? So we had to touch a lot of people, and we found some issues like date format was not understood. So in Germany, they write date format differently. And that's a big issue, right? So we have to take a look at these, even if it is the main flow. And then one thing was Baloo's character. Sometimes, as you say, it would be moody, and it would tell strange things. So I don't know what would happen, but I would feel slightly insulted sometimes talking to Baloo, and this is all about the way how we configured it, right? So if our default, if we don't understand the intent, and then default answer is the laughing smiley, is that a good answer? Not sure. But, and also like if you say sad, obviously Baloo didn't understand what I said. It wasn't defined, and it's fine that it's not defined. It shouldn't be Woobot or Elisa, right? But saying lovely thanks, within any context, it can be slightly wrong. So what you should do a lot with chatbot is define the character and actually adjust the utter. So what language does it use? And that is an extremely difficult task. We spent ages trying to adjust the language that it could be based on the chatbot, and not me and not someone else in the team, because all of us come with a certain style of communication. So we would like the chatbot have a lot of variation. However, it was very hard to actually stick to the character. And a lot of times we would look back at this workshop that we did trying to define the character and understand what is Baloo. What is not me, but what is Baloo and what it would actually answer. And lastly, dialogue matters a lot. So if we are thinking about chatbots, we want continuity. We want chatbot to be engaging and to always be proactive. However, sometimes with Baloo, it would ask a question, but if you answer it, it would not understand what I actually meant. So for this situation, and in general, thinking of all these cases when we try to think about conversational flows and how they work, it's very important actually to release the chatbot as soon as possible, so you could actually look at the data there is. One part of it is the machine learning metrics, of course. Hopefully they will come in the long run and and happen, the dialogue metrics, that we would get fast feedback. However, I spoke to some chatbot creators, the ones even that were very close to prestigious chatbot awards, and all of them just collect the data of the chats and analyze it manually. So there's no way to actually refine the chatbot to have very good conversation apart from a human looking at the conversation. And this screenshot is actually from Chatbase, from the tool that could collect what kind of conversation happened and where it died off. So the red faces show that, okay, in this situation, it died off, and you can go and analyze this and then actually refine your chatbot and adjust it accordingly to cover this. So once you release your chatbot, it's very important to actually look at the data, and the work likely starts. So thinking about Baloo, I didn't think about pyramid anymore, and I decided to create a quality table. So of course, I started with unit tests, they have integration tests, but then something different happens. So we need to look at machine learning metrics. We need to understand them, and we need to expand our knowledge on this. And then there's a lot of exploratory testing. Exploratory testing in a sense that you become a psychologist. You need to think of how humans communicate. And lastly, we try to get it out live and actually do a lot of monitoring and strategic analysis. You need to know how your users are using it, and you need to tune it. So when I think of all this quality table, I think for me, the biggest learning in general for this chatbot was that the quality of machine learning chatbots needs a better understanding of human communication first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lina. That was great energy. So never trust your chatbot if you are sad. Any questions?
I can add one. Aside from testing, I know it's challenging, but how do you log a bug for a chatbot? Like, for example, in the old-fashioned, I believe we have to call it old-fashioned testing already, we are normally writing prerequisites, and we are writing some conditions that we are fulfilling, and the steps that we are following. How is it with machine learning? Like, do you have some sort of metrics that you can export and provide to the developers so they can reproduce the same situation, or it's just like trying to follow some rules?
So for this case, we usually just use screenshots of conversation that happened. And then debugging was a bit of a black box, especially if you use frameworks that are not built by you, right? So you don't even know why this machine learning framework returns something. So then it would be a lot of playing around with data in the long run. But the reporting itself would be likely the screenshot of conversation. And sometimes it would be very challenging because you don't know why this happened. So you would need to play around a lot to find the shortest conversation possible as shortest reproduction steps.
Did you use maybe Scrum Agile methodologies to work with that type of bot, or like that?
No. So this was like a project which was sort of, we call it beach project. Like in ThoughtWorks, there's a concept of beach when nobody is assigned to a project and gets some internal project. So there we had just a Trello board, and we would move it. I mean, tasks need to be done, right? So we didn't have sprints. We had reviews every 2 weeks, so we would show what was done to the stakeholders.
In your opinion, what kind of knowledge the tester needs to work with chatbots? What kind of soft skill or social skills are needed?
Yeah, a lot of social skills. I question mine, I guess. So I think first of all, the new part here is the machine learning, that we need to learn about machine learning, at least slightly, at least to understand the metrics, to understand what they actually look at. So I remember the first day I was being told about neural networks and everything, and I was like, whoa, the head is exploding. But you need at least slight understanding of what happens behind the curtain. And then it's a lot of actually communication with other people as well when it comes to this kind of contextual machine learning chatbot. For rule-based engine chatbots, it can be slightly easier because you have diagrams and you have flows.
So when it comes to machine learning, how would you prevent it so that it's not going to be a fiasco like Microsoft Chatbot on Twitter that was shut down after 16 hours because it became racist and Nazi?
That is the main challenge, and I always say that data is driving all of this. It's not that the data gets generated out of AI itself. We're not to this stage, there's nothing to be afraid of. The only thing we have to make sure it's there, it's this good, not biased data, and data was self-learning, right? Mm-hmm. So you could feed anything. But at this point, we're actually observing this data. So we're trying to learn, right? And as testers, we may need to actually level up our skills as well when it comes to this, to make sure that we are not putting our biases in, we're not putting creators' biases in, and so on. Actually, in one of the meetups, there was a very good idea to make an open source data set that we would all know that is inclusive and we could all work on it. So if anyone wants to contribute, let's do this.